Hey, we got a supercut. If you don't know what these are, this is essentially just a big old video of all of my best perks videos for all of the black metal weapons. I'm making this video because I have no current plans to update any of these videos. They are a little bit aged. They were closer to when I had just started making best perks videos, but I think most of these are still good. You're still going to get good perk recommendations, and if I do end up updating any of these videos, I will pin a comment or update the description. So without further ado, enjoy.
Oh boy, today is a great day, not because of my Sour Patch Kids, but also because Fortnite Mayor's llamas are here. So if you're watching this upon release, it should be... Oh, no, it's not going to be Halloween because it's 4:30 in the morning. Anyway, it's going to be Halloween soon, which is like my favorite month of the year. And the Fortnite Mayor's llamas have officially replaced the Wild West llamas. So if you missed out on those llamas, then it was basically the Bundle Bust and the Spyglass and the Old Betsy. They were great weapons. Link to those videos in the description below, along with all my other weapon guides if you wanted to check those out. Oh, I think the 6-shooter was in there as well. What's important here? We got brand new weapons that are in the game. So I can show you all 4 of them in the collection book right now, and that's in the event schematics. Boom, right here. We get the black metal set. You get an AR, which looks like a pistol. Don't at me. That's a pistol. I don't care what the devs were smoking when they made that. That's a pistol. The sniper is one of the most badass things I've ever seen. This thing looks like it was pulled straight out of Borderlands and then was like given this death metal kind of... Oh, I love it. I love it. The spear is... I don't know anything about the spear, but the two that I'll be making videos on the shotgun and the assault rifle. So if you're watching this video, this is going to be the assault rifle, and then in a few hours you should check back because the shotgun will be released on the exact same day. So we'll talk about this one next. Also looks amazing. This weapon looks... Oh, God, I honestly love this set. I'm not just, like, hyped about a new event. I'm the kind of guy, if you guys have watched my streams, that when I see a new event, I kind of rip it to shreds. Like, I like to be, you know, realistic and optimistic, but if a weapon's bad, I will call you out on it. But if it's good, like the Gamatron, I will max it out twice just for the 6 perk variation. So this is definitely one of those sets where I am going to be, well, quite literally maxing out twice for the 6 perk variation, because what's new with the black metal set is they are, it's weird. So they do extra damage and different bonuses based on the amount of health that you don't have. I was put off by this immediately. I thought to myself, okay, there's no way that's gonna work, but after using it today in stream, it's not that bad, because at least in this example, there is reloading, stunning, and knocking back enemies. Sometimes it activates every 3 kills. I don't think that's all of them, but that's at least 3 of them, where 3 kills, reload, and knocking back. I got all 3 different ones. I got the reload one on my assault rifle, which I quite like, and what it means is every time I reload this weapon, I lose 12.5% of my health. I used this with Blast from the Past. That was my immediate instinct, and it worked really well, so I didn't try anything else out from there. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have any other suggestions, but I use this with Blast from the Past, and that's for a couple of reasons. So one thing that's important to note is this is a percent. So it's going to take 12.5% or 1/8 of your health, no matter what you're doing. It's like you're poisoned in Pokemon. But with Blast from the Past, that means that you're going to have a lot more health left over. In fact, when I'm using this weapon a ton and I'm using it in combat and I'm not really healing anything, like with coconuts or whatever, I'm basically plateauing at about 300,000 health, and that was with a group of people, and, you know, if I wasn't using Blast in the Past, that would be closer to, like, 30,000 health. So it's kind of a big deal to have Blast in the Past to keep yourself healthy, and I would recommend using coconuts with this, and I do, because it's a fantastic safety net, but it's important to note that this 5th perk down here is huge, adding 80% bonus damage based on the percentage of your missing health, and if I'm not mistaken, just based off of using it in today's stream and a little bit of assumption, I'm assuming that 80% is based on how much health you're losing. So with 20% of your health remaining, I think you're getting the most out of that perk. It doesn't explain, so I can't actually look into that any further, but that is my best guess as to how that works, and that seemed to correlate in the main game, and that's why I mentioned having 300,000 base health, because that's where you start healing when you have 30% of your health. I was hovering around there a lot because that 80% bonus damage is just, it's a big deal. This gun is not that impressive stat-wise, but that's okay because every time I reload, on the next enemy hit, it does X amount of damage in a, 0.75 tile radius, which you don't really need to know beyond. It just does like an explosion amount of damage. Explosive amount of damage, area of effect. It does not impact propanes, I am happy to report, so it's not going to be setting those off. It's not a literal explosion, it's more of an outburst of damage. And that's a fantastic thing. When I'm I'm using this with my reload, all I got to do is shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot, reload, and it's kind of like a low power grenade launcher in a weird sense. It's actually very, very good for crowd clearing. So you don't need to use it like that. Again, you will be using up a lot of your health to do so. And that brings me to another point. I was late to the party. It seemed like everybody in the stream had figured this out but me. But that 12.5% is relative to the amount of health that you currently have. I know this is obvious, but like if you have 100 health, it'll bring you down to 87.5. If you got 87.5 health, it'll bring you down to 12.5% of that, and then 12.5% of that. So it goes down lower and lower and lower and lower. So it is actually quite difficult to kill yourself using this set, which is just amazing that I'm talking about a weapon set saying that right now. Like, obviously, if you could kill yourself, if you could do damage to yourself, then launchers would be quite dangerous, but I digress. I thought immediately when I saw this set that you were going to be constantly just killing yourself with the amount of damage you're doing, but no, that does not seem to be the case, so I'm just impressed. Alright, so now that I got all of that out of the way, let's finally get into the actual perks of this thing. Many of you have probably already clicked off because you saw them and then you left, and I wouldn't blame you if you did, but there is more to talk about, so if you stuck around, then you're in for a treat. First and foremost, this isn't that big of a deal, but I tried it out so I can share with my experience. I tried to use first shot Rio with this because I thought it would be nice, but this weapon actually fires in 2-round bursts, so that bonus really isn't that big of a deal, and that's the only other reason I could imagine you'd want to use double crit damage here. But let me explain exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing here. To those of you guys who have watched me typically know that I like mag size, but that's not even an option here. And even though there is fire rate and another crit damage and damage, there are a lot of good options for perks on this weapon, and there are a lot of different ways you could spec it. If you want to go raw damage per second, then double crit damage crit rating is probably the best way to go. If you want to smoothen it out a bit, fire rate is actually typically better than double crit damage. In this case, it would be slightly better to actually just go with fire rate. Slightly better or the same, it doesn't really matter. This is a fairly slow firing gun, so 7.2 per second is not that fast. I think that might even be slower than the Gravedigger. So double fire rate might be a good way to go for this, but I opted for reload speed, and that's because my 6th perk, as obviously reloading reduces my health and gives me that damage explosion. So I went for reload speed, but it's important to know that crit damage is nice, but now you're banking a lot on your crit chance, which you're not always going to hit your crits. So when a smash is charging at you, you better cross your fingers. So fire rate is typically what I prefer to recommend over double crit damage when doing a crit rating crit damage loadout. As for the other crit rating, I wouldn't suggest using either of these. That said, if you do have the perk where Stunned and Staggered gives you the bonus, you might want to consider an impact perk. If I'm not mistaken, that will help you out. If I'm wrong and that won't even trigger the Stunned and Staggered effect, then definitely go for crit rating crit damage. I think that's just the best way to go here. On most weapons, damage and fire rate is identical to crit rating crit damage, but having used this weapon, I can't really explain it. I just don't think that's the way to go. Especially because reloading this thing, you know, takes away your HP. You kind of want to get the most bang for your buck, and crit rating crit damage is definitely more damage per bullet on average. And for the 5th perk, I went for this just borderline reason is because with this new weapon set, this perk is perfectly tailored to the black metal weapon set, so I wasn't not going to use it. Having used it, that 80% bonus damage is huge. That is, I mean, it's just amazing. I wouldn't want to not use this. And that's pretty much it. I used it in game. This weapon is phenomenal. The only other element you can use is fire, which no doubt would look badass when the weapon is black metal like this. But when it comes to elements, you typically either want a series of weapons to cover all the different elements, meaning if you had a fire one of this, you'd want a water and a lightning kind of a thing. Or if you're going to have any option, it would be energy. Obviously, we don't have that option, so I'm thinking physical is probably the best bet here because I would rather do 50% damage to all enemies than none to water, normal to fire, and then like a little bit less than physical damage to physical enemies. I think physical is the best overall here, but fire is definitely another option. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys are as excited about this set as I am. I definitely had my reservations and straight up doubts about this. I thought this set was going to be terrible. I thought at face value, I'm like, how could losing your health possibly be helpful? But honestly, these weapons are amazing, and I think the shotgun might be one of my favorite shotguns in the entire game. So if you're watching this video on the moment of release, then just a few hours prior, my AR video came out. These are the perks that I recommended, but before you go off and select those, I'd highly recommend checking out that video below. It has a much more expanded perspective on why I picked these perks, what your options are, and my overall opinion on this weapon set itself. And that's also where I covered the other weapons in this set. This is more of a part 2 to the assault weapon than it is a pure guide for the shotgun. That being said, I will say that this weapon set absolutely surprised me. It is way better than I thought it was, and I'm just gonna, like I said, leave most of those details on the assault weapon video, and let's get straight into the shotgun. This might be, I don't want to be that YouTuber that claims this, that's why it's not in the title, but this might be one of the best shotguns in the entire game. I, multiple occasions, left a Mist monster at just a sliver of health with my party of friends when just shooting it once. And it shoots in bursts of 2, so I mean technically you're never shooting it just once, but boom was more than enough damage. A couple of crits brings it like 500,000 damage sometimes. It is amazing how strong this weapon is. I got lucky, I think, because the options for this 6th perk are interesting. So stunning or knocking back my enemy reduces my health by that amount, deals that much damage to that big of a radius, and it only happens every 6 seconds. You can see the numbers on screen. What that means in the main game, and why I'm not saying the numbers, is because when you're out there fighting, all you're going to see is your health going down, enemies taking extra damage because of it, and there's going to be a cooldown so you don't kill yourself instantly. Now, that 12.5% that you lose is based on your current health, so you will lose less and less and less and less actual HP every single time, so it's actually quite difficult to kill yourself using this set. That being said, because it's a shotgun loadout, I would highly recommend using Blast from the Past. That's what I've been using in all of the gameplay that you've seen, and is definitely my recommendation because you are going to need a lot of health to keep yourself alive. And I also recommend Blast from the Past purely because of Iza. Her 33 armor is super important. When you have so low health, you're going to need the armor to keep you alive because that will keep you going for another day. But that's just sort of my recommendation. You can use whatever loadout you want. You're definitely going to want a shotgun loadout if you're going to be using a shotgun anyway. And let's get into these perks. So going with the 6th perk, as I was talking about earlier, stunning or knocking back an enemy, I think is probably like the luckiest thing I could have gotten. Reloading is nice because it triggers it automatically and then your next shot kind of happens. But while you're firing into a crowd of enemies, you kind of want that explosion to just happen, especially with a shotgun when they're right up in your face. You want them to just sort of affect the enemies around them and then get knocked back. There were multiple times where I was shooting into a crowd of enemies, and this impact from this shotgun took a fatty up off the ground and flying backwards. And you can do that to a crowd of enemies, and it is highly effective. And when you do that, it does tons of extra damage, and it lowers your health when it does so, which only increases the damage because of this 5th perk down here. That 80% bonus damage is huge. That is almost double. I mean, if you're doing 100 damage, now you're doing 180 damage. Scale that up to the thousands, and we're doing 250,000 in a hit, and it is amazing. Now, if you want to do more than 250,000, you're going to want crit rating crit damage. Now, this is an interesting suggestion because typically crit rating crit damage is not my recommendation for shotguns, seeing as you don't fire that many bullets, but the fire rate on this is fairly slow, but you are firing 2 shots at once, so you're basically getting 2 chances for a 43% chance, which is kind of like a, I'm not gonna do the math, but it's kind of like an 86 and 200 as I do the math, so it's not like you have a higher chance to crit, you just have more opportunities per burst, and because it shoots twice, you know, it just sort of reduces that margin of error, and it hits like a truck. Like I mentioned, it feels really good to be using this in battle. It's not that accurate, but up close, it's quite the powerhouse. Now, as I said in the AR video, I would suggest if you have this 6th perk, maybe trying out Impact. I'm not sure if that'll increase the chances of this getting triggered, but this really does send enemies flying. Part of the Black Metal set's tokens, part of what's special about them is their high impact across the board. On the AR and the shotgun, that is definitely something that's nice. I'm not a person who's ever really been into impact, but I'm telling you, picking up fatties and sending them flying really made me feel good today, and has sort of changed my mind. But as for this 5th perk, I don't think you want to change that. The element, you can do physical or fire. I'm going to link my video below on on the AR, obviously, where I talk more in depth on this, and my element video to sort of give you a better idea for what you want to do. The fire is going to look badass because this thing looks like it's made to be on fire, or physical, which I think is, personally, I think it's best all around, and that seemed to do really, really well for me today. I do reload because I like to just stay in the action. However, with a shotgun, maybe fire rate is what you'd want to do. This isn't the fastest firing gun as is, and the reload is kind of long. 75% brings it down to 1.5, so it's pretty slow even with the reload perk, so you're going to want to make a judgment call, although I know many of you are going to want to go for that crit damage, because this has a base 15% crit chance, which means you're already up to 43%, which means you are very, very close to half of your shots critting, so double crit damage is absolutely a good way to go. That said, you will be a bit clunkier because you're going to be giving up your reload speed and your fire rate, so that's just something that you're going to want to be careful about. That said, I mean, crit rate and crit damage seems to be the way to go on this one. It's a fantastic weapon, and as I said, I was blown away by how powerful it was. The only reservation I have about this, honestly, the only reservation I have about this is the fact that its durability seems to be a little lackluster. I don't know exactly what the damage per bullet is to your durability, but this gun right here was after like 1 or 2 games, it went down to 156 durability, and that was quite disheartening. Did that happen twice? Oh, I stopped at 156 because, yeah, I don't know. That was like 1 or 2 games, and I almost lost half the gun. So something to be careful of if you don't have a ton of oxidized mineral powder. I always say Sunbeam on all of these. I would not recommend making this obsidian, but what I would recommend you do is click subscribe, use code Mista in the item shop, and like the video, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Check out the AR video if you haven't. Have fun using this set. Go get some candies. This is one of my favorite sets of all time. I won't be making a video on the sniper or spear as of now because they don't seem very good at all. I don't want to give you guys tutorials unless the weapon's actually worth using or talked about heavily. Alright, so we're going to start this video in a lot different way than I've ever made any of these videos. I've almost never shown loadouts on best perks videos. I will link below the description on the best ninja loadout if you want all the information on ninjas in general, but for this new weapon, it's a little bit tricky. So, being as it's part of the black metal set, the black blade, it buffs your damage based on the amount of health you don't have. So, using Paleo Luna, which is typically the best melee ninja, which buffs your damage based on your health, it kind of counters itself. So, I'm going to try using Assassin Sarah and then keep the blast from the past because seeing as the way this weapon works, I'll show you now, finally, it actually buffs your damage, you know, every kill, space 3 seconds, it does damage to you and then like an explosion of damage around you based on that. So you're constantly losing health and taking damage from enemies, so you're definitely going to want to use code Mist in the shop, as Nokel says. You're definitely going to want to use, you know, a loadout that heals you, so coconuts are also highly recommended. Based on its slow swing speed, attack speed is probably highly recommended. That only went from like 0.58 to like 0.49 or something like that, so maxing this out would definitely be advised. Crit rating, crit damage is probably good, seeing as the attack speed is going to be a little bit faster. However, it does come default damage, and life leech. And then, of course, for the black metal weapons, I'd highly recommend keeping that 5th perk, the perk that buffs your damage based on your health missing, because that's kind of the whole point of the weapon in general. But for this weapon, I might have some bad news. So, I'll be honest, I haven't actually tested these perks. That's why this is kind of a different video. We're doing this a little bit more fun today. We're doing it live. We're doing it live because my opinion is already pretty set. And that's that because it has such a slow swing speed, about, you know, 2 swings a second, and then it has a cooldown, it's one of those swords that goes whoosh, 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 and then slows down, and then whoosh, 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 and then slows down. And it leaves you vulnerable while you're swinging it. So I can actually show that. I'm going to craft this one, and then I'll use the old one just to demonstrate. So what you've got here is it swings, and then it just slows. And then you're kind of just like locked into the animation the whole time you're doing that. And even on the new one, that attack speed really doesn't make exactly a world of difference. And as I go into a crowd of enemies, you'll see that the first kill will trigger that explosive damage. It'll do a little bit of extra damage, but you'll be hurting yourself the whole way. So it's not a weapon that's necessarily powerful, and it's incredibly dangerous to use it. I genuinely can't recommend this weapon as of now, seeing as until we get a team perk for the black metal set, it's gonna be very, very tough to recommend. I mean, like, just look at how much time this smasher is taking. This poor weapon. 60k. Yeah, I mean, the crit, you know, if I was hitting more crits, I'd be doing better, but I mean, even the Spectral Blade is going to just shred through this thing and not really have a problem. It's a much faster swing speed, and then, you know, you get the lunge, it's just so much better. So, I'm not sure that I can recommend the Black Blade, but these have been the best perks on it. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe this weapon is a lot better than I thought. See your perks. The only options for the elements are physical and fire. That's something to note on your way out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Check out the links in the description below for the Spectral Blade. All my weapon guides will be part of that link, and then also the ninja loadout as well as my hero guides. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think. Have a nice day. So it's recently occurred to me that the Metal Marauder's been in the game for a couple of weeks now, and I haven't made a video on this, which is shocking because in my recent Best Rockets video, link below, I placed it above the Santa's Little Helper, on par with the Deatomizer, and right up there with the Storm King's Wrath, which of course is its own category, but that video gets into that further. My point is, this is an extremely powerful weapon for me to not have covered yet, so let's get right into the best perks for the Metal Marauder. I'm going to show a little bit of gameplay on screen right now to demonstrate that this is an extremely powerful weapon. I mean, if you haven't tried it out, you should absolutely give it a go. I know a lot of people are a bit biased towards the black metal weapons, because, I don't know, I guess your weapons hurting you isn't everybody's favorite thing, but that damage is huge, and as long as you're careful while you're shooting it, you know, you hold on to going coconuts, make sure that you're healthy while you're shooting this thing, you should be a-okay. However, even as I've been using it in my own sessions, it does tend to get away from you and do a lot more damage than you planned, so it's important to stay careful because this weapon will definitely be worth it so long as you can, you know, stay alive in the battlefield. And the Metal Marauder best perks are very simple in my opinion. So because it has with a reload perk on it, a 1.7 reload speed, that means you're basically shooting once every 1.7 seconds, which is fairly slow for this kind of weapon, and I would never recommend a crit build on something that shoots that slow. That being said, rockets tend to affect many enemies all at once, and each one of them do crit separately. So if you're constantly using this for encampments and you're constantly shooting crowds of enemies specifically, then a crit build might be a good way to go, but I just cannot recommend anything other than damage for this kind of thing, because I just think the consistency is more worth it overall. And of course, on the 5th perk, you're going to want to have that 80% bonus damage based on the percentage of your missing health, because that's kind of the entire feature of this weapon. You know, you're meant to be losing health while you're using this, you're meant to be low HP, and you're meant to be doing 80% extra damage because of it. Obviously, reload is sort of a preference. I think reload's best because you'll be getting more shots off more regularly. Obviously, damage is a really good way to go if you want to just maximize your damage, or crit damage would technically be the maximum potential damage, but the least overall, you know, consistent damage, I should say. I think on average, crit builds tend to do more than damage, but barely when you're shooting as slow as you are with a rocket launcher, and I think the best option other than reload here would be damage. And obviously, there is an impact perk here, and that's something that's insanely important to talk about, and that's because the impact in the Metal Marauder is huge. You can have not one, not two, but 3 impact perks on the Metal Marauder, and that is a really, really big deal. You will be staggering almost every single shot you hit on every enemy you attack if you go with the impact perks. However, I think 38,600 is pretty good just by default, and I've never ever recommended or seen any benefit from replacing damage perks with impact. However, it is an option for a weapon like this when it is the king of impact in the game of Save the World. And then your only other element choice is fire. And that looks badass, you know, it's cool because of the black metal set, but I think physical's probably the best overall right there, and that's pretty much it. The Metal Marauder is one of those basic cookie-cutter rockets that is extremely powerful, and it is unique in the sense that it takes health and turns it into damage, but it is ultimately just the typical perks I'd recommend for any rocket launcher. So if you guys haven't tried out the Metal Marauder, I highly suggest giving it a go. It is one of the best rockets in the entire game. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for Benz getting all this gameplay. Thank you guys for watching, and have a nice day. Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about the new bow and, the new bow. What are we even calling this thing? I hopped right into a game with it. So, this weapon is hiding. The Night Owl. So this is the new addition to the black metal set. I have very low HP right now, which is helpful because it'll show the extra damage that this thing can do. And it seems to be a typical, well, bow. Just, the rolls on this weapon come crit rating, double crit damage right off of the bat. And we left it the same just so that I could show it right out of the shop. And I don't know. It seems bugged. I don't know if I'm just terrible with a bow, but you really have to lead your shot with this thing because, yeah, if you don't crit, if you don't aim ahead and hit everything, then it's kind of tricky. Now, the bonus on this thing is if you hit 2 enemies at once, it'll, you know, cause that explosive damage, reducing your health and hitting multiple enemies.
I don't have any coconuts right now in this build, so I'm going to have to use campfires here. Now, that is a % of your health, so you have to be very low for it to do any damage. And my overall recommendation for this weapon is to honestly not even use it. And that's why I'm recording this in-game. Normally, I would show you all of the different perks and go over what's good, what's not, but I saw there are damage perks for this. You can roll impact on it and reload just like normal. Obviously, because it's a black metal weapon, it has that extra 80% bonus damage in the background, which is nice, I guess, but I'm not convinced that this is a usable weapon, at least with my very first impression. Now, I'm still going to upload this video as a best perks video because I think that I want to tell you guys, you know, if you're trying to make this weapon work, how you really want to use it, and I think for a weapon that fires this slow and has little to no AoE damage, you're not going to want to run crit on this. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, and they usually do for a lot of my videos, but crit on a weapon that fires this slow and doesn't hit many targets is a waste, because you're constantly gambling every single shot away. So if you're going to use this weapon and you seriously want to make it work, all damage is all I can really recommend. Adding that bonus damage is great. 80% extra damage is awesome if you're constantly running on low health. And if you're trying to use this for crowd clearing, you're always going to be on low health because it's not seeming to be a very powerful weapon. So yeah, that seems to be what Chad is agreeing with right now. I would love to see if this weapon could be any better, but as with most weapons that are ultimately bad, I'll tell you, all damage might be the most consistent, but the best perks for this weapon is to simply use something else, because even on a crit, I can show you the damage here, is about 95,000 or 190,000 if you hit the head, which is impressive, I'll give you that. And right now, I'll go to game half so you can see all of the stats. Critical hit damage is 420%, which is huge. I mean, I have the Rabbit Raider Jonesy for the extra 75% in my support. So a 5.2 multiplier is pretty big. I mean, if you just hit a body shot with this thing, you're probably going to be hitting for about 500,000 damage, which sounds like a lot. But when it comes to snipers, if I can actually switch my face there, when it comes to snipers, the Obliterator does 400,000 every single headshot, and it shoots exactly where they are in the scope with dead accuracy, and it has a very decent fire rate. And my all-time favorite, Spyglass, hits for well over 500,000 if you have a really good party. Not, 511 isn't seriously impressive, but if you have a good party of people, you can get easily 550,000 on a headshot with the Spyglass, and it doesn't require any other bonus. It'll do this in a soldier loadout, 500,000 in the headshot. So I'm not convinced that the new bow is anything more than what I kind of expected it to be. Like I said, if you have something else to say about it and you think this weapon is better than I portrayed it here, let me know in the comments below. I want to know if there's a way to make these weapons good, but based off of the simple math and my personal experience with it, not only can I not recommend this, but I don't know that it's too great of a weapon. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Quick review on the new weapon in Fortnite Save the World. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you're new, like the video, and have a good rest of your day, you guys. You know, I'm starting to see a trend with melee weapons that I've never really taken a look at. A lot of these are actually pretty usable. Now, I know that Paleoluna offers a lot of extra damage, but there are weapons like the Mic Drop which really impressed me. And no, I'm really not just plugging here, because what we're covering today is a spear that behaves very, very similarly. The Mic Drop has a heavy attack that, eliminates a bunch of enemies in a crowd in front of you, and then it makes them dance. The Nightfall doesn't quite make them dance, and the way it swings is essentially the same way. So it has the classic Black Metal 6 perk options, where it reduces your health and then turns that into a crowd effect damage that eliminates the enemies in front of you, and that is not a popular 6 perk for kind of the obvious reason of you're taking damage. I've never personally minded it. I always thought that it was kind of a neat idea that you could eliminate enemies by reducing your own health, and it reduces it by a %, so it's not really going to kill you unless you're not very careful. And you can even leverage that with a 5th perk to increase the amount of damage you do based on the amount of health you don't have. But that is a pretty dangerous way to play, and especially with a melee weapon, you are constantly surrounded by enemies. So while I do say that you'll only die if you're not being careful, I can understand how it's pretty hard to not die if you're trying to take on an encampment or something. However, with the new update recently, you can now have a special 6 perk, and that is what is on the copy that you're seeing today, and that is a 44% damage bonus to nature enemies. And if you weren't aware, the Black Metal weapons can only be physical and fire. So while I would never recommend physical normally, some weapons can get away with it, like the Black Drum. I'll link that video down below. I'll link all my Black Metal videos for that matter, and I will be updating those links as I release more of these videos, because today, if I stay in shape and I stay on track with what I want to do tonight, I will be uploading 2 melee videos. So if you're watching this as the day of release, then the Brood Slicer should be short behind, and if you're watching this in the future, then then of course it'll be linked below and recommended at the end of this video if I remember to update that. But because of this new 6 perk, it really gave me a second look at these weapons. Obviously, them coming back to the game from the Fortnite Mare's Llamas was kind of a big deal, and that's why a lot of people are talking about these weapons again. But I think that 44% damage really makes it pretty viable, because you'll see that it does, pretty great against these nature enemies. It's eliminating them very, very well. It's keeping up in these 140 zones, and then it's performing fairly average against the normal zombies at no deficit to the normal performance, which is kind of nice to add. In fact, like the damage to affliction and slowed and snared always consumes a perk, but in this case, all we're doing is just giving the weapon an element, which has never really been a bad thing to do. And because of the 6 perk being damage to nature enemies, it really works well with the fire element to make this a super effective version of the weapon. Now, if you're trying to spec this thing, let's talk about it. So big thanks to Moonman and Daniel. The two of them offered the Brood Slicer and the Nightfall to me, and I really appreciate those two helping me perk it up. So my copy is still level 12, but huge thanks to those two for supplying me those weapons. In this case, if you're trying to perk the Nightfall, it depends on the 6 perk. So we're going to start there. You do have a few options, and right off the bat, no, I do not recommend using your core reperk on this. It's not that big of a deal. First and foremost, it's not that strong of a weapon. I mean, it's good. It's fine. You can see I'm using it in game. I didn't really die at all using this, and I was actually fairly impressed. If you want to have a fun time using an off-meta weapon, then you can go ahead and try out the Nightfall. It's not some kind of game changer. This is not a must perk, so I would not recommend using your core reperk on it. It's not that big of a deal. And of course, the other reason is that it is available in the llamas right now. So if you just want to speedrun some dungeons, a link below on how you can do that. You can do it very effectively. You can absolutely just storm through those dungeons and open lots and lots of llamas and probably get plenty of copies of this thing. So there is no reason to expend anything extra on this. But if you do get lucky enough to get the damage to nature 6 perk, then we'll talk about that later. But if you have one of the regular 6 perks, which plenty of you might have, and there's obviously 3 more of these than the other one, I don't think it matters which one you have. Whether you're hitting an enemy 4 times, eliminating an enemy, stunning or knocking back, you might have personal preferences. I think that the eliminating one is more consistent. Stunning or knocking back might just happen randomly, so that could also be helpful. It kind of just depends on your playstyle, and I don't think that any of these are really significantly better than the other. If you have any of these 6 perks, you can go for the adds bonus damage based on your missing health. I think that's the most reasonable. Obviously, if you're using Paleoluna, then you're going to be constantly trying to keep your health up for her bonus, but then wanting to keep your health down for the weapon bonus. I think it's safest if you're running Paleoluna to just keep your health as high as possible, because her damage bonus will be significantly more than this. But whenever you're in the middle of a fight and your health starts to lower, this is where the 6 perk will kind of counteract her damage loss, and you'll probably stay in the fight a little bit more effectively than you otherwise would. But if you have the damage to nature enemies, there's not really any reason to have the bonus damage based on your missing health. The same logic applies, as enemies do hurt you, and in this game, a lot of times when the enemies hurt you, your health goes down. So in that case, it could be nice to have that 5th perk, but it's not really, as I mentioned earlier, a safe way to play to be banking on losing health. So I just think that the best way to go, pretty simply, is just damage. If you want to activate the 6 perk for, hurting enemies, then I guess you could up your impact to try and activate that more often, but that's a little finicky, and I really just think a damage perk here is the best bang for your buck. Now, this should come to no surprise to anybody, but seeing as we're using a melee, you're basically going to need an attack speed. I really can't recommend using this weapon without an attack speed perk. I think it is pretty much required, unless you are specifically using Totally Rockin' Out. If you're using Totally Rockin' Out, you can go double crit damage, and then the attack speed from that team perk will sort of make up for the low attack speed. But in a conventional build, I just have to recommend attack speed here. Even though you're replacing a crit rating or a crit damage perk, you just need to swing faster, or else this weapon will be leaving you waiting for a while to hit that next enemy. And then, to no surprise as well, with a 20% base crit chance, on melees, it's really, really safe to just go crit rating, crit damage. I know that not every swing is going to crit, but 2 things happen here. 1, it's a really high base crit chance. With a crit rating perk, you're maxed all the way out, you're going to have a 48% chance to crit. And because of the way that it swings in an arc, you'll likely be hitting multiple enemies at once, and each one of them will have their own chances to hit a crit. So it's almost always going to take more than 1 hit to eliminate the bigger enemies, so you're almost always going to crit on that second shot. So crit rating, crit damage is a pretty basic way to go. So that's pretty much how you're going to want to perk this thing. It's not really all too complicated. Double crit damage if you're using Totally Rockin' Out. Base your 5th perk around your 6th perk, kind of try to be safe there. I would recommend fire regardless of whether or not you have that bonus damage to nature enemies. enemies. Obviously, that would be the best case scenario against nature enemies, but I can't really recommend going physical if you're playing in the end game. If you're somebody who's in Stonewood, Plankerton, or even Canny Valley, yeah, you can go physical. That'll probably be the best bang for your buck, but you're going to see a lot more elemental enemies in later Canny, and definitely all up into the Twine Peak zones, because that is where the elemental zombies will come out, and you're no longer going to appreciate having physical. And then, of course, for the normal build, just attack speed, crit rating, crit damage, and then if you really don't mind attack speed and you're okay with a slow swing speed, then a second crit damage perk on top of a crit rating perk is probably an okay way to go. You never want to go double crit rating because of diminishing returns. If you want me to explain that, I'm going to link my Silent Spectre video down below. It's a video you should check out anyway, but I kind of get into it there. But the basic idea is that crit rating, the more crit rating perks you have, the less effective each one is. And in this case, it would be significantly better to just have crit damage, attack speed. Any of these would be more useful than that second crit rating perk. All of these would apply more damage to your total output. But that's it for the Nightfall Spear. This thing really impressed me. It's not something I'm going to be using every game. I'm not going to pretend like this is a new game changer, but it's not a weapon that is nearly as useless as I thought it was, and it kind of impressed me that a lot of weapons can be viable with the right loadout. Obviously, Paleoluna is doing a lot here, but it impressed me regardless. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. If you guys want to become a channel member, you could do that with the join button on the channel or the link in the description below. You can now use member emotes in the comments below, so that'll be pretty cool. If you guys remember, you can send some of those emotes down below. I do stream on Twitch now, so if you guys want to check out that link in the description below, it's a fun time to hang out over there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. Dude, oh my goodness, back-to-back uploads. This is not common for me, but I wanted to knock out the black metal weapons. If you guys didn't check out the Nightfall video, that'll be linked in the description below. Pretty awesome video. All my other black metal weapons will be linked down there if you guys are curious, and I will be updating that with the future links as I cover more of this set. But thank you to Moonman for shooting me a copy of the Brood Slicer, because not only did he shoot me a copy of this, but we screwed up the perks a little bit, because I confused the 6 perk of this weapon with the Husk grinder, and he had to get me a different copy of this. So thank you to him for wasting a little bit of his reperk for the sake of this video. But the Brood Slicer is essentially just a basic scythe. You swing it back and forth and it eliminates the enemies more deader. I did think that it did what the Husk grinder does, just like the Steam Thrasher where you can spin around endlessly. It does not do that. We'll be talking about that when the Husk grinder comes out. The heavy attack on this is the Whirlwind effect, where it eliminates enemies for a brief amount of time, but you can get off some extra spin damage. That is okay if you're in a pinch, but I wouldn't totally recommend using it all that much. It's not that helpful. I found that it was more useful to just keep swinging normally. But if you're in a crowd of enemies, it's actually quite effective at taking out lots of them, and you're definitely going to want attack speed, because this is one of those weapons where, like most melees, you're going to need an attack speed perk to make it useful, and I don't really know what else to say about it. These weapons are all kind of very similar, but the Brood Slicer has all of those fancy 6 perks that you might have expected from the black metal set. I myself do not have a damage to nature element version, but that is sort of preferable. So if you want any of the 6th perks that reduce your health for extra damage, you can definitely use these. I can't really say that any of the other 2 stand out in any particular way, because that damage loss is not that big of a deal. It doesn't necessarily debilitate you too much. Losing health isn't everybody's favorite thing to do, but it does give you a little bit of extra damage, so I don't think that it's necessarily bad to go with any of these 6 perks, but I do think the damage to nature enemies not only gives you the most damage, but also keeps you alive in the process. So if you're trying to perk this weapon based on those damaging 6 perks, you probably want the extra damage based on your missing health. That makes the most sense to me, but of course Paleoluna gives you the most damage based on how much health you have. So you want to keep your health up for Luna, but down for the weapon, and I'll tell you right now, Luna gives you the most damage buff based on the amount of health that you have, so it's probably important to try to keep your health up as much as you can. But if you're taking damage during a fight, then that extra damage based on your missing health can kick into play and give you a little bit of extra damage. So let's talk about the way that I sort of messed up. So in this case, if you want to go for the heavy attack, which I wouldn't totally recommend, but it's not a totally useless heavy attack, you're definitely going to want probably a heavy attack efficiency, and then any of these 3 heroes to give you a little bit of extra energy. I know that there are other heroes in the game that might help you a little bit more, but Sorian Focus, Anti-Cuddle Sarah, and the Fallen Avenger Jonesy tend to be the most consistent in healing you, and I think that they are tried and true. Any 2 of those in support or any 1 of those in the lead will keep you swinging for a while, but that information is a little bit more applicable to the constant spinning heavy attack, which this one does not have. But in that case, we went heavy attack, efficiency, crit rating, double crit damage. That's pretty much okay to do, because this thing has about a base 15% chance to crit, and with Wet Out Fiona affecting it, because it's a scythe, you can get this thing up to a 50.5% chance to crit, which is really, really nice to have, and will definitely have you critting very often. In fact, since we're over 50%, you'll be critting most of the time. So it should come to no surprise to anybody that I'm going to be recommending a crit rating, crit damage build on this, because you have a high base chance to crit, you have a decent crit damage, it's kind of a kind of a match made in heaven. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to want an attack speed. Now, we're rattling off the perks so quickly here because I don't really know what else to say about these weapons. It's a melee with a decent swinging arc. You're going to be hitting lots of enemies at once. It's surprisingly good for crowd clearing, but not so fantastic against the single targets. And that pretty much wraps up the Bruise Slicer. There's not too much about this that differentiates it from the Nightfall, and that's sort of why I'm recording this video right next to that one, so we can knock out a few of these black metal weapons. I do want to cover the whole set, just in case anybody's curious about any of these individual weapons. The Husk Grinder, as I've alluded to a ton, will definitely have a little bit more to talk about, and we'll get into that when it re-releases. As I'm sure plenty of people might be wondering, by the way, if you go down into the event schematics down here, check out the black metal weapons. This is what we are getting from the Fortnite llamas. If you're trying to farm a ton of those, I'll link my dungeon guide in the description below. Still relevant if you're trying to farm tickets, but it does seem that the Dirge Song, Metal Marauder, Husk Grinder, and I believe the Black Blade are not currently available. I think you can get the Midnight Stalker from the llamas. I think people have been getting a choice between that and the Night Owl, if I hear correctly. So for these missing weapons, I will be covering these as they come out. That said, I have covered the Black Blade and the Metal Marauder. So if you're curious about those, as I mentioned earlier, those will be linked below. But the Husk Grinder and the Dirge Song should be coming out later. But for now, we'll be talking about the remaining ones that I have not covered. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. If you guys want to become a channel member, you can right here. You can use those emotes in the comments below now, so that's pretty awesome. I am streaming on Twitch now, though, so if you guys want to follow down in the description below, I'd really appreciate it. The streams are pretty cool. We hang out, have a good time. Hope you guys enjoyed, and have a nice day. All right, we're going to do things a little bit differently today because I usually like to talk about the qualities of a weapon that make it good, or why you might be interested in it, or, you know, obviously how you want to perk the thing, and we will be talking about the perks in today's video. But I decided to take a different approach because the Midnight Stalker is by far one of the worst weapons I've tried in a while, and I actually reviewed the Crescendo recently, so that's actually saying something. Unfortunately, snipers have a pretty bad streak in this game because it's a slow-firing, high-powered weapon that can usually only take out one enemy at a time, and that's not really helpful in Fortnite. Very often, you're dealing with crowds of enemies, and while mist monsters and smashers exist, typically a high-powered SMG, AR, shotgun, you know, even a fast-firing pistol is more effective than a sniper against those bigger targets. Now, in the lower zones, I used a spyglass all the way through up to Canny and even early Twine because it had an insane headshot multiplier and could easily one-tap any mist monster that I shot at that wasn't, you know, a smasher or something. But the Midnight Stalker has all of the traits of a sniper, except for the fact that it shoots 2 bullets at a time, besides the fact that it also doesn't really do that much damage when it does shoot. So let's talk about where this weapon falls short. That's it, damage. I don't really know what else to say about it. It has a pretty good reload speed, an okay fire rate if it did a great amount of damage, and the fact that it shoots 2 shots at a time is great and all, but it definitely doesn't save this weapon. So no, I'm long past the days of my Nailer video where I just recycled it. I want to explain why a weapon is bad, and that's kind of it. If you're somebody who searched this video and were curious about the Midnight Stalker and you were wondering why nobody ever uses it, that's kind of it. Now, sitting in this lobby, I can already show you that there are ways to make this weapon viable. It's doing about 100,000 damage with a headshot, and it does shoot 2 rounds at a time. So that's an easy, you know, 200k, you know, just like that. And that's not that bad. In the end game, it is really bad because I was just hovering over the Black Drum, which does about 47,000 in the headshot. This is a shotgun. It shoots quite a bit faster and kind of hits multiple enemies at once and is just great for crowd clearing. The Black Drum, I finally leveled up my copy that does bonus damage to nature enemies, and this thing is as good as it ever was, but it's even better against nature enemies now, and it doesn't hurt you, which makes it basically a normal shotgun, and I love this thing. I love it all over again, and if this thing crits, it's doing a whole heck of a lot more than that sniper is, and it's a shotgun. Now, I understand that the sniper has range, you know, that, where is it in here? 10,000? That's basically the map. I mean, that's basically wherever you want to shoot, it's gonna hit. It's not across the map, literally, but it's plenty far enough to be, you know, tapping enemies from far away. And that can make it viable if you're just trying to be lazy from a distance, but you've got better options. Like I mentioned, the Spyglass or the old Betsy or the Obliterator, or those are basically the important ones. You can use a bow for any of the bows for that kind of job. I don't really see where the Midnight Stalker is useful. So we're going to be quick on the perks. Now, if you're using this specifically for mist monsters, physical is okay. Most of them aren't going to be elemental, and like I said, if they are elemental, which smashers and mini bosses can be, you're more likely going to be better off using a a higher sustained damage weapon, like an SMG, an LMG, or a shotgun, something like that. A sniper is not really something you want to unload into those bigger enemies. And the 6 perk also matters. Any of the ones that damage you are fine. It's okay for crowd clearing. It's not great. If you're going to give this to a defender, which is not a bad idea, then you don't want them to be hurting themselves. So honestly, the damage to nature is like the only way that I would ever power this weapon up. This is an old copy. I just leveled it up because the weapon was new, okay? That's all I'm saying, all right? Huge thanks to Tompus and Flo from the Discord for dropping me the copies that I showcased today. I can actually head to my backpack right now. They did drop me a few copies so I could test this thing in all of its different capabilities. So we got one with the eliminating 3 enemies damages you, and then we got a couple that are damage to nature. I didn't really think it mattered too much if the nature one was headshot or crit. I kind of wanted to just test it in all of its, capabilities, and what I came up with is this. If you're using this for mist monsters, which is basically the only time you're ever going to use this thing has no crowd clearing capabilities, then double headshot physical is probably your best route. And for the 6 perk, I would prefer the damage to nature, but if you're using this against mist monsters, it doesn't really matter anymore. I would recommend fire rate instead of the reload perk, and instead of the bonus damage based on your missing health, that is where you should put your reload perk. Or if you want to maximize just the damage to mist monsters and you're kind of okay with a slower fire rate, you can do the damage to mist monsters and leave the reload right where it is. As for the crit build, it's kind of the same story as the headshot, because it will crit to do a lot of extra damage, and that's great and all, but the headshot damage, assuming you can hit your shots, is going to be a lot more consistent damage rather than just kind of hoping for a crit. It will happen fairly often because with a 15% base crit chance, you're going to be up to a 43%, and that's pretty high. That's pretty good. You're going to be critting almost every other shot, so it's not bad. You can do crit rating double crit damage on this thing. I wouldn't recommend it. You can do crit rating double crit damage and then put a reload even, and that works, but again, you're going to be kind of hoping for crits, and it's only going to be useful when you do crit, and for a weapon that's already pretty underpowered, you're going to need as much help as you can get. So yeah, obviously if I max this thing out, that headshot's going to be doing a lot more damage, but there's not really any way that I can totally see to make this thing work. So yeah, fire if you're going to be using it against everything, but again, that doesn't really make sense. And then physical if you're going to be using it against mist monsters. Double headshot I think is more consistent. Obviously if you can't hit headshots, not everybody's exactly a marksman, then crit and crit damage would be fine. It's got a pretty decent crit chance and crit damage, so you're going to be all right there. And as I said, that 5th perk down there can totally be something different if you want to swap up that 2nd perk and make it your own. So I do think fire rate goes a long way on this weapon. It has a very, very, very slow fire rate, and without that perk, it was so tough to use this that I just didn't even record any more gameplay. So if this video has a lot more menu footage than any of my other recent best perks videos, now you understand why. I will get back to the normal flow of things with a different weapon, because this weapon is kind of a case study for me. It's not just a, hey, check out this weapon and all of its, glory. It's more of a, here's what went wrong and why. Because Epic did a good job with some of these other weapons. I mean, Black Drum's really, really strong. The Blackout AR is pretty good. It looks like a pistol. A lot of people make that mistake. I did when I first got it. But for the Midnight Stalker, they honestly, they took a break on this one. But I'm saying, if they just literally just doubled its damage, and that's okay. It's a freaking sniper, you guys. It's like they wanted it to be more of a DMR, but the fire rate's too slow for that. So either up the fire rate and let me use this thing like a pseudo AR, or up the damage and let me use it like a proper sniper. Knowing Epic, they'll probably do neither, because typically when they release a weapon, that's it. The only weapon that I ever remember that got like a specific nerf was the Storm King's Wrath for just doing way too much damage. And you know what? As I'm recording this, there was one specific weapon that also got a nerf that I'm going to probably remember as soon as I'm done recording. I'll pin a comment if I remember it. It was the Jabberwocky. That's the one that I was talking about. That video will be linked below. Also, so will the Black Drum. I never plugged it at any point, and also all of the other black metal weapons, and I'll update that list as we continue. And, just so it's not such a negative video, the Ghost Pistol, which is something I should be covering in the future, actually got a massive buff, like, outside of all the other weapons. So, I mean, it's not all bad. Sometimes the weapons get better. I do know that lots of weapons at this game got a rebalance with the 12.0 update. Obviously, I'm aware of that. I'm aware that lots of things get tweaked here and there, but it's pretty rare that Epic dials in on a single weapon. So maybe the Midnight Stalker will get better someday. I doubt it. If it does, I'll let you know, but it's currently available from the Fortnite Mares llamas. So if you guys want to speedrun those llamas, get a bunch of tickets, maybe get a ton of Midnight Stalkers so you can recycle and get your weapon designs up, I'll link my speedrun guide for that in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. Become a channel member here. You can use those emotes in the comments now, so that's pretty cute. If you guys want to check out the streams, I do those on Twitch now, so follow with the link in the description below. Hope you guys have a nice day, and thanks for watching. So let's back up a year, and this weapon is brand new to the game. I'm thinking about
about giving it a go. The other YouTubers are covering it. I pulled it out and was just not impressed. And today, of course, since it's re-releasing, I figured I'd give it another look. And well, I think I had it right about a year ago. So the Dirge song, if you don't know, is a 9-burst SMG, which is unique in its class. There aren't that many burst SMGs, but 9 burst is definitely weird. You got the 8 burst of the bundle bus. You got the 4 burst of the Trinity SMG, which is ironic because a Trinity would be like a 3 burst. I don't get it either. And it's not like a 3 burst like the Lynx or like a normal burst AR in like real life, for example. It's a 9 burst SMG, which makes it feel a lot stronger than it is, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So that's basically what it is. It shoots small ammo, not a ton of damage per bullet, 9 shots per shot, or 9 shots per burst, and that basically means you have about a 4-round mag, which looks weird because you have about 36. Now, I will note that in my loadout, as you can see on screen, I'm using assault ammo recovery, which means that at the end of pretty much every single magazine in this video, I'm going to have 1 or 2 shots remaining, which sometimes is nice to polish off an enemy, and is other times just sort of annoying. But what I have on this is the reloading causes my current health to go down, and then that transfers that damage into an explosion into a crowd. I found this quite useful. I was able to use it in an encampment later in the game where I was able to eliminate more enemies at once. That's nice to have and everything, but with a lot of the other black metal weapons, you actually have the new 6 perk to have some damage to nature enemies. We'll be checking that out later. I don't want to spoil the perks quite yet, even though they're not the most interesting, because this is one of those weapons that's really cookie cutter. Because you're shooting bursts, you don't need rapid fire. You don't need any fire rate perks on this thing. Shooting faster doesn't really help you in any way. I think it can minimize the time between the bursts, but it's really not going to help you. And another thing to note is that it's pretty inaccurate. So it does have headshot perks, but you're really never going to be hitting all of those headshots. And even shooting an enemy that's standing right in front of me, I was having a lot of trouble actually keeping on target. Now, I'm somebody who has hit at least 1 shot before. So with a weapon like this pulling me all around, it was a little bit jarring. And I feel like if this weapon had a little bit more accuracy, a little bit less pull and like horizontal recoil, and a full auto version of it, I think I'd prefer using this weapon a little bit more than I do now. But I feel like this weapon forces you to play in a different way from normal because it's a burst weapon. You have to line up your shots, make sure you're getting the most out of those 9 bullets. But the payoff for that different playstyle isn't exactly anything better than any normal weapon that you could use. My point in saying that is like a Silent Spectre, a Thrasher, and of course I have to mention the other SMGs in the game because you probably have the Thrasher or the Silent Spectre or the Bobcat or the Viper or even a base game SMG, literally any other SMG in the game that's fully auto and probably will give you a bit of a smoother experience. If you want to just try something different, I will recommend the Dirge song. I was able to use it in 140 zone. It was actually impressive enough. It's nothing that's going to be carrying you through a mission, but it's actually quite useful. It will eliminate enemies. I was having trouble against the bigger targets like a Smasher, but against pretty much every other normal enemy like a Mist Monster or any other normal enemy, it was quite good enough, and it did the job. I don't know what else to tell you. It's more of like a B or a C tier weapon. It's not going to be carrying you in the 144 players or God forbid the new 160 zones, but it'll do the job if you're just trying to use something different. So if you're just trying to have some fun this year and you're somebody who can afford it, I'd actually recommend powering this thing up and having a good old time. And I also want to say that because of that inaccuracy, it has some trouble against the riot shielders. I had a lot of trouble and at one point even died during an encampment because it just wasn't happening. I probably could have eaten a coconut, but that would have gone against the extra damage that I have on this weapon. Speaking of which, let's talk about how I was running this thing and why. So yes, I did mention that the perks were very boring. This is really conventional. Crit build is pretty much standard in all of my weapons, and there are a couple of interesting stories here. So first and foremost, because you're shooting 9 shots at a time with a 38% chance to crit on average, 3 of your shots are going to crit every time. That's never going to be 100% consistent, but on average, every 9 bullets, you can just assume that, 3 or 4 of them are going to crit. And so for that reason, I think double crit damage is completely fine. And the other reason is you don't really have any other options. I mentioned that you have a couple of headshot perks, but you are just not going to be hitting headshots on this thing. It's way too inaccurate. No matter how perfect your personal accuracy is, the bloom fans out instantly, and you're just going to miss a lot of those shots anyway. I also address how fire rate's not really going to be helping you at all here. I don't really see a point for it. So the extra damage would be nice from like triple damage, but you like I said, you're probably going to be critting anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. I honestly believe that crit rating double crit damage is essentially the only way to run this. The interesting story that I mentioned is the variability in the 5th perk, where if you have one of the 6 perks that reduces your health, you can actually play with that. Like I mentioned, I did find it to be a little bit useful, being able to reload my weapon and know that my next shot is going to hit multiple enemies. That is okay to play with, but adding bonus damage based on your missing health is a really dangerous way to play, and I don't really think it's that necessary. I will also mention, and this is what I think is funny, is that a reload perk might actually help you a lot here, because 1.8 reload is really low. That's actually extremely good. That is for normal SMGs that aren't running through their magazine in 4 bursts, because 36 looks like a lot, but when you're shooting 9 of those shots at a time, you're going to be draining your magazine constantly, and I honestly found that 1.8 seconds was actually kind of insufficient, and the bonus damage was almost irrelevant because using Blast from the Past and Coconuts, I was almost always topped off on health. Now, that could be a personal point. Obviously, if you are somebody who's using this weapon to the maximum of its potential and keeping your health nice and low constantly, that could be helpful, but ultimately I think it's safer to just go with a reload perk. Impact isn't really going to be helping you at all. I don't think that that's going to be doing anything for you, and the damage to miss monsters and bosses could be nice. Maybe that's something you prefer. It could definitely help against the smashes that I mentioned earlier, but I honestly think a reload perk would have helped me, at least with my personal playstyle. Now, of course, I need to mention that you have a bonus damage against nature enemies. That is, in my personal opinion, the best way to go. If you're going to use a Dirge song and you're really going to make the most of it, then you might honestly want to just reperk it. Now, I will say as a massive disclaimer, there are lots and lots of weapons in this game with lots and lots of new 6 perks and different 6 perk options, and that core reperk could certainly be better spent elsewhere, but if you really just want to make this weapon work, as I said, then damage to nature could be the best way to go. Run fire on this thing. You don't want to use physical unless you're in Stonewood, Plankerton, or Canny. If you're in any of those 3 zones, physical is going to be great, but if you're in Canny, like Lake Canny, or anywhere in Twine Peaks, you're definitely going to want to pick an element and just commit to fire. Use this thing in nature zones, have that bonus damage to nature enemies ready to go, and that'll be the most effective this weapon can be, unfortunately. So it's kind of an interesting weapon. I really do think it's good. I don't think this is a bad weapon, but I don't know that it's anything that you're going to want to invest too heavily in. However, I always recommend buying the weapons from the shop. If you're still on the fence about it, build up the gold, speedrun some dungeons, link below. While they're in the game, go get it done. Run some ventures, get it taken care of, because these weapons do change and evolve. Epic could change anything at any time, and they've proven that they will. So this weapon could be a much different weapon later down the line, and if that does happen, I'll pin a comment down below to make sure any changes are addressed so that this video can continue to be relevant without me needing to redo the entire thing. So yeah, definitely grab this weapon if for nothing other than the collection book. If you guys are enjoying the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. You guys can definitely become a channel member with the link in the description below or the join button on the channel. You get to have all of these nice things, get the emotes down in the comments below. I'm really glad that they're supporting those now so I can put Benz's face anytime I please. I tend to do some pretty awesome live streams. I'm even recording this video during one right now, so if you guys want to follow me on Twitch and be a part of a video creation or something like that down the line, you guys can definitely follow with the link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. Dude. Finally, my dreams of becoming a lawnmower have come true once again. The last time I got to experience a joy like this was when I covered the Steam Thrasher. Link to that below. But today we're going to be talking about the Husk Grinder, which is a very, very similar cousin of the Steam Thrasher, sporting very similar stats with a higher base chance to crit, a bit of a faster attack speed in the way that I spec'd it, but a slower native attack speed, and then of course a little bit of a higher impact just so that you can activate that fancy 6 perk. Now, the Husk Grinder, like the other black metal weapons, did get the update where you are now able to have a little bit of extra damage to the nature enemies, so running these weapons fire is basically the best way to go now. You don't really want to do it physical unless you're in like Stonewood, Plankerton, or Canny, but on that note, I am getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to mention the fact that it has very, very similar stats to the Steam Thrasher, so if you're looking for a very similar experience and that you can spin around and deal lots of damage with that heavy attack, you have come to the right place. So the Husk Grinder is, as I said, very similar to the Steam Thrasher in that you don't really want to use its main attack. It doesn't swing very fast. I did put attack speed on mine, but I'll talk about the perks later on and why I'm not really going to recommend that. It is rather nice to be using it in its normal state. You don't need to rely on having energy, but energy is pretty easy to manage. If you have, like I always say, one of the big 3, if you have Dino Southie for the constant energy regeneration Blast of the Past, which you're going to want anyway because you're going to have Paleo Luna giving you that extra damage because she is just the best melee hero to have, or you can have Anti-Cuddle Sarah giving you extra energy upon eliminations,
and then of course there is the Fallen Love Ranger Jonesy. Now, those are the big three, the classic three, but there is also Dennis. I've not really utilized him much. I have heard that his burgers are textured now, but you guys can explore that on your own. My rule that I always say is that you either want two of those heroes that I just mentioned in the support, or any one of them in the lead, and then you should have enough energy regeneration to keep that spin going. A couple of things to mention is that there are heavy attack efficiency perks that you can put on the weapon, and then of course there is a heavy attack efficiency perk on a hero that you can throw into your support as well. She will keep you in the fight and is definitely a good recommendation. I of course forgot her name, but I put her on the screen so you guys can check her out. Now, as for the damage, it is a slightly bit less than the Steam Thrasher. The Steam Thrasher does have less overall damage, but you're able to run an extra damage against the slowed and snared enemies, which gives it a little bit of extra damage on those second hits. I felt like the Husk Grinder was doing perfectly adequate damage, though. I feel like it might have been because I was running Luna. That adds a lot of extra damage for sure. But with crowd clearing, it's just fantastic. You can absolutely cleave through crowds of enemies, mow them down, if you will, delete everything in sight, and I really found like it was a pretty decent way to go. Spinning around like a top is fun and all. You know, I haven't had these kind of joys since Beyblade, but there are kind of other ways that suit my personal playstyle, except that I do know that a lot of people actually tend to prefer these kind of weapons. So if you're into that kind of thing, of course, the Husk Grinder is going to be great for you. Single target damage is definitely where it suffers, though. I feel like everybody who uses these weapons knows exactly what I'm talking about, where you come up against a Smasher or a Mist Monster or a mini boss, and you just make no progress. It's really, really tough to eliminate them. I was personally capable in my single player here, but it was not the best way to... Honestly, even with a melee loadout, I could have just thrown on an AR or an SMG or a shotgun and done the job a lot faster. Now, if you're going to be running the Husk Grinder and you want to perk it to maximum efficiency, let's talk about all the different options here, because I feel like there are a lot of different ways to go. So, I already touched on the element. I highly recommend Fire. If you're in Stonewood, Plankerton, Canny, or very early Twine potentially, you can kind of get away with physical, but even in Twine Peaks or late Canny, you're definitely going to want an element just anyway, because elemental zombies will be more and more common, and this will basically be your nature enemy eliminator, which is kind of unfortunate because nature enemies will hit you and drain your energy, but as I already mentioned, there are lots of answers to getting more energy back faster, and then of course you have that extra damage to nature enemies. I do believe that's the best way to go. I think the extra damage to nature is certainly the preferred, but if you have any of the other two damaging perks, you do have a couple of options. So first and foremost, you have the bonus damage based on missing health. That is going to be a little tricky if you're using Blast from the Past and Paleo Luna. I'm somebody who just likes to stay healthy. I think Paleo Luna's bonus damage with your extra health is significantly more damage than this fifth perk will give you, but you can kind of run that if you're sort of, you know, planning on staying low HP, but when you're stuck in the animation of spinning around, I really don't think that's safe, and it's really hard to control that. Not to mention, if you just run heavy attack efficiency down here, which as I mentioned you're kind of going to want anyway, you have room for a crit rating double crit damage build, and this is where I talked about attack speed not really being the best way to go. With an attack speed perk, we're only down to 0.75 seconds per shot essentially, which is really slow. That is barely fast enough to just swing normally. You might as well just use the heavy attack and spin around a little bit in that case. I don't think attack speed actually did anything for me. It doesn't speed up your heavy attack. You won't spin around any faster. It's just going to be kind of a dead perk most of the time. So I think an extra crit damage perk is definitely the way to go, because as you can see here with Whiteout Fiona in my support, 55.5% of the time I'm critting. When your crit chance is that freaking high, I have no reason to suggest anything other than a crit build. I mean, there's just no reason not to. Unless you want to go the extra credit route of running maybe a damage perk instead of crit rating and totally rocking out. If you're willing to have totally rocking out, it'll be a lot less safe, you'll be a lot more frail, and you'll take a lot more damage. But you will have the added benefit of swinging faster because of totally rocking out's ability, and a really, really nice crit rating bonus from the team perk itself. So that'll give you a lot of chances to crit, a much faster swing speed if you're not using the heavy attack, and it'll make you a lot more frail. I don't have any gameplay of that because that's really not the way that I want to run this weapon, but if you're somebody who likes to do that, then you've kind of got your answer. But that's pretty much it. There's not really any other way to spec this weapon. You got a couple of optional perks, but ultimately I think that crit rating double crit damage is probably the way to go. I'm sure that was an expected answer, but I do like to mention that there are other ways to run this if you want to maximize some efficiency. For example, if you're using the heavy attack efficiency in the support, you might be able to run damage to miss monsters and bosses, because as I mentioned, those are the enemies that are going to be giving you the most trouble, or you could just run an extra damage perk and enjoy the extra damage from that. So there you go. That's pretty much the Husk grinder. I already sort of talked about the loadout. I suppose it's fair to mention that I did flash it on screen, but this is what I was running. Anatomy lessons, again, from Whiteout Fiona is just really, really nice to have, and I opted for rapid charge because that's just sort of my preferred. Of course, I mentioned Dennis and the Fallen Leverage Jonesy. Those are perfectly good alternatives, but of course, Saurian Focus is an obvious pick because I'm running Blast in the Past, and then Coconuts and all that are pretty standard anyway. I feel like that was a pretty solid way to go. If you guys enjoyed this video and you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. You guys can become a channel member here. This is one of the last black metal weapons that I had yet to cover. This might be the last, but I don't want to say that because there's always one that I'm forgetting. All of them will be linked to the description below. If I missed any, of course, I'll update that list as we go. So if you guys want to check out any of the other black metal weapons, you can do so down there. I did cover the Dirge song earlier today, so if you're watching this upon release, that video is definitely up and certainly worth watching. Check out the top 10 weapons video, recent upload of mine, big video. It'll be recommended at the end of this. And if you guys want to check out any of my streams, you guys can go down to the description below, click that Twitch link, and hit follow. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then